Good afternoon. My name is Ivan Contreras, and I'll be presenting on Pancho Villa. So Pancho Villa was born on June 5th, 1817. He was born in San Juan del Rio, Durango, Mexico. Villa spent much of his youth helping out his parents' farm. After his father's death, when Villa was only 15 years old, he became head of the household. With a new role as head of the household, he shot a man who was harassing one of his sisters in 1894. After that, he fled, spending 6 years on the run in the mountains. While there, he joined a group of fugitives and became a bandit. Although the specifics of what occurred in Villa's life during this time are unknown, it's confirmed that he changed his name in order to avoid getting caught by authorities. He changed it from Doroteo Arango to Pancho Villa. In the late 1890s, he worked as a miner in Chihuahua, in addition to selling stolen cattle. But it wasn't long before he added more serious crimes to his record, like robbing banks and taking from the wealthy. He was later inspired by reformer Francisco Madero, helping him to win the Mexican Revolution. After a coup by Victoriano Huerta, Villa formed his own army to oppose the dictator, with more battles to follow as Mexican leadership remained in a state of flux. He was finally assassinated on July 20th, 1923, in Parral, Mexico. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Sarina Maya and I will be presenting the Villistas. The Villistas are supporters, followers, and members of Pancho Villa's forces. And they mainly fought for land redistribution, justice for their people, and for an undefined socialism in the era of El Villismo. El Villismo was a political movement that took part in the Mexican Revolution, and it started in 1878 and ended in 1923. And his supporters, followers, and members were a mix of caudillos, charros, rancheros, vaqueros, maderista bureaucrats, and unemployed workers. And you can see here in this part of the mural that these are the villistas right here, the workers. Thank you.
Hi, now I'll be speaking about the slogan Tierra y Libertad. The slogan Tierra y Libertad is often associated with the Mexican Revolution and mainly with Emiliano Zapata. However, this slogan can be seen in multiple revolutionary movements. It originated in Russia and was used as the name of the Russian Revolution Organization, also called Semlia y Volia, in 1878. In Mexico, this motto was first used by the Magon brothers, Mexican anarchists Ricardo and Enrique Flores Magón, the founders of the Mexican Liberal Party. Proof of this can be found in Ricardo's play titled Tierra y Libertad.
Good afternoon. My name is Fatima Cáceres, and I'll be talking about Huerta and his persecution for Zapata. Victoriano Huerta was a military officer in charge of a military detachment to take President Diaz to his exile to France. The truth is, Huerta was an opportunist and a manipulator, willing to use and kill people in order to quench his thirst for power. Unfortunately, Madero entrusted Huerta, which became a fatal fall for Madero. During Madero's presidency, it became obvious to Zapata that there was no future for agrarian reform. Therefore, Madero begins to lose control over the region of Morelos, and Zapata revolts for immediate land reform. Therefore, Madero was not willing to agree to any expropriation from his people of his own class, and a bloody civil war was fought in conclusion. Later on, Zapata creates the plan of Ayala, and Pascual Orozco reunites with Pascual Orozco as his revolutionary leader. Henceforth, Zapata goes after the revolutionary army with complete impunity in taking the rebellion down. Madero attempts to settle an agreement with Zapatistas with concessions, but military officers such as Huerta accuse Madero of being underestimating the war against Zapata. In time, Huerta betrays and assassinates Madero and Suarez, making Huerta president. The The assassination of Madero caused frustration to the people and caused a course of civil wars across the country. Later on, Mexico's economy spirals down. After all the years of war, Huerta resigns his presidency so the American troops may leave Veracruz. This led to Huerta's departure from Mexico and arrival in Spain. Then, Huerta receives a letter from Pascual Orozco and Alvaro Cardenas, stating that they're going to overthrow the constitutionalists in Mexico City. Thus, Huerta accepts the offer that Orozco and Cardenas proposed, but shortly after, the United States finds out of Huerta's plans and arrests both Orozco and Huerta while crossing the border. They were both imprisoned in Fort Bliss, where Huerta dies in custody in January 13, 1916.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Germán Parra, and I'm going to be talking about the scientificals and how their ideologies relate to the murals. So the scientificals from Mexico were a group of advisors that were in power mainly during the time of the Porfiriato, which reigned from 1876 to 1911. However, they also had power during the Plutarco Elias Calles reign, in which they promoted business to benefit the country and themselves. This ideology was created by Rosendo Pineda and Manuel Romero. So who were they? They were technocrats. This basically meant that it was a select few that ruled the country, or as I found in the internet, a system of governance where decision makers are selected on the basis of their expertise in their areas of responsibility, particularly scientific knowledge. So they rejected theism and leaned towards a secular Mexico, since they believed in science to a vast extent. They viewed natives and other peasants as inferior, believing that they were holding Mexico's progress and modernization back. They believed that if they eliminated or eradicated these peasants and natives and had more people like themselves, they would modernize Mexico. This relates to the painting because the people portrayed are peons and peasants, as you can see, which were the ones the scientificals believed were holding Mexico back. Therefore, Porfirio Diaz and the scientificals were liberal, wanting to change Mexico. This is why they wanted a lot of foreign investment. The foreign investment would allow modernization of Mexico, in which people that focus on technology would help Mexico's progress. They used this as justifications for Diaz's government. They made people believe that they were helping Mexico when they really weren't. They were just selling Mexico away.
Good afternoon, my name is Ricardo Silva, and I'll be talking about positivism and social Darwinism. So during the Diaz regime, two movements were adopted. These two movements were thought to improve Mexico, and one of these movements was positivism. Positivism is the movement that promotes science and logic over metaphysics or religion. Diaz and his scientificals believed that Mexico could only progress through science and technology. The group that first embraced this movement were the scientificals. As previously stated, they were a group of intellectuals under Diaz. These officials advocated for the use of social science to help improve financing, modernization, and education in Mexico. However, this movement did fade away after the fall of the Diaz regime, but it would come back to light during Calles' presidency. The next movement adopted by scientificals was social Darwinism. Social Darwinism is the theory that all life is subject to the natural laws. This movement, however, was used to justify racism towards the indigenous population. The scientificals believed the indigenous were unteachable and that they held society back. It seemed to be a waste of resources to try to educate and improve their lives. The harsh conditions they lived in and worked in were results of this movement. So here in the mural, you could see the indigenous working hard and brutal jobs while the hacendado relaxed. Thank you.
A land law of 1883-1894. During the Porfiriato, a land law was passed which granted ownership of more than 27.5 hectares of land to foreign companies. By 1894, these foreign companies held ownership of 1/5 of Mexico's total territory, and by 1910, most villages had los ejidos, communal land. These communal lands became the haciendas and were ruled by a few hundred wealthy families who forced the American natives, which had previous possession of the land, to work for them as debt slaves. This eventually led to the exploitation and poor treatment of workers, one of the causes of the revolution, as well as the big difference between the rich and the poor. As I mentioned earlier, this land law was one of the main causes of the Mexican Revolution and eventually brought the land reform, which overthrew Diaz from his reign. This land reform was mostly led by Emiliano Zapata in Morelos.
Good afternoon. My name is Julissa Fierro, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Peon and Peonage. When Mexico was conquered by Spain in 1521, its people suffered 300 years of domination by its often cruel and greedy host. Indians were first required to do labor for the first quarter of the year and were allowed to work on a small plot of land the rest of the year. After the War of Independence in 1821, the system continued, but with a new twist, debt peonage. Indian workers were given advances in their wages with the distinct purpose of getting them in debt. In addition, they were paid in script, or a sort of coupon or note redeemable only at the company-owned stores. Prices for basic necessities were greatly inflated, but the Indians were generously extended their credit, which only meant that they would plunge further into debt. If they ran or tried to escape, they were mercilessly hunted down, dragged back, whipped, and or killed. And you can see this right here, he's being whipped. And over here you have a rurale with a whip. When the worker who could never hope to pay off his debt in its own lifetime died, his debt was automatically transferred to his firstborn child. The child at birth would then assume his father's debt and then would automatically acquire his debt once he started working. The practice continued until 1911 when Porfirio Diaz passed a decree outlawing the use of peonage in Mexico. Despite this law, peonage continued until 1937 when Cardenas created the ejido system, which is when agricultural land had been expropriated from the haciendas, turned into communal farms, allowing natives to earn wages according to the amount of work performed. While this practice was obviously and inherently evil, there was a greater evil present, and this was the creation of a race who came to believe that their sole purpose on earth was to serve a master, and that belief which still endures in many of Mexico's poor today. Thank you.
Good evening. I'll be covering the sugarcane production in Morelos. Morelos itself can be described as an ideal location for the growth of sugarcane. It has a volcanic soil and also a subtropical climate, as well as an abundance of water. The Spaniards knew this, and they took advantage of the geography of the land in order to exploit the people. They were searching for a group for population who was controllable, manipulable, and could be exploited in order to do cheap work. Of course, sugarcane was the cash crop. Cash crops are meant to be exported, and the revenue gained does not really go to the population who does the work. In this case, the people in Morelos, they had terrible wages, along with the harsh work conditions. Their work was basically slave labor. Another factor that was required for these plantations to work was a amount of people and an amount of land, a specific amount. Also, they needed a schedule, a really strict schedule that was based on the seasons. In terms of the workers, they needed people who grew the sugarcane, people who cut it, transport it, and of course, they needed people who managed the whole entire process. We were usually haciendados and people with higher status, not peasants. These peasants obviously did dirty work and did not quite get a lot of credit for it. In fact, the working conditions were so harsh that many of them ended up with cuts in their hands while they were cutting the sugarcane. Thank you.